It used to be the case that nearly every video game out there had a single-player mode. The idea of multiplayer amounted to gathering a few friends over to your home and playing a game on a single console. But now in the era of the internet and online gaming, multiplayer gaming has taken off in new and interesting ways. In fact, multiplayer gaming is so popular that some developers have begun to make games that completely get rid of the single-player experience, like Titanfall. Other developers are making games that emphasize multiplayer play, but potentially at the cost of the single-player experience. But is the single-player experience actually dying? Will it eventually become a thing of the past? We're going to tackle this question right here on this episode of Downloadable Content. Hello everyone and welcome to Downloadable Content. I am Brian, and once again we have Ron.
Hey everyone.
And joining Downloadable Content for his first time, we welcome Kasey to the fray.
Welcome.
Welcome. We have our another latecomer, late in the season, adding to the tally, joining the ranks of all of the other panelists that have graced this show before, so I hope you enjoy yourself. You picked, I think, a good topic to join in on, and hopefully you have quite a bit to say about it. I would assume so, that's why you are here. So before we get started, ladies and jelly spoons, I'd like to remind you that, as always, you can find downloadable content on iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher. You can get in contact with us a variety of ways. On Facebook, facebook.com/DLContent, at Twitter at DLContent, Tumblr at dlcpodcast.tumblr.com, and of course you can always email us dlcontent1@gmail.com. So, let's dive into the discussion at hand, people. This actually, I think, was a suggestion for this episode was brought by Ronnie, I think. I'm pretty sure it was Ronnie.
We have like multiple Rons here, so we
we have Ron and Ronnie. So this didn't come from you, and it went from it came from the other Ron. But he could not make this episode, alas, because retail.
The horrors of retail.
The horrors of retail. He works at Walmart, and I pity the bastard.
I did holiday last year as for Target, so I know the pain he's going through.
So we're gonna have this episode for him.
In honor of him.
In honor of him, yes. So, the single-player experience is dying. Some people seem to think that. I was reading an opinion article from the website VentureBeat.com, and he was lamenting the fact that he thinks that the single-player experience is dying, that more and more developers are doing away with the single-player because multiplayer is where it's at. And then you have others, like Bethesda developer who worked on Dishonored, saying that the demise of single-player games are completely overstated, and that he argues that every time there's a new video game cycle, somebody says, well, this is dying, or that's dying, So, I'm curious to actually feel where you guys think, what you guys think on this particular question. I don't particularly think single-player games are dying, but I will elaborate on that in a bit. I want to hear what you guys have to say first.
Well, for me personally, I don't think that single player will ever actually die. Certain games are going to get multiplayer aspects. For example, I wouldn't be surprised if Final Fantasy gets a multiplayer aspect that is not in an MMO, for example. But then,
Card game. Cough.
Other games may expand on multiplayer or just do away with single player altogether. But I don't think it will ever truly actually die.
I don't think so either. Ron, what say you?
I think we will see I don't think we'll see as many single-player games being released as time goes on. I think we will see most single-player games be your occasional AAA games, and then the indie community developing most single-player games. And I feel that's going to be more so because of the large AAA studios will not want to spend multiple years developing a single-player game when they could get more money out of a multiplayer game because of the relative ease. Because developing a multiplayer game is its own can of worms, but the longevity of your game and being able to make more sales off the game, I think you would get more sales out of a multiplayer game than you would a single-player game.
I think, though, that if developers largely abandon single-player, I would think that they're cutting off a large chunk of their potential fan base.
They are, because I know a lot of players that hardly play multiplayer and they focus entirely on the single-player part of the game.
And I know people that don't touch single-player at all and just do nothing but multiplayer.
So, it largely depends on your circle of friends. I don't think that, I think single player's demise has been greatly exaggerated. Take, for example, very recent examples. Skyrim, which came out a couple years ago. That is entirely single player. There is no multiplayer component at all to Skyrim, and that title was immensely popular. It made money hand over fist. Games like BioShock, the crux of the game and its emphasis is on the single player. I mentioned in the intro, though, Titanfall, for example, Activision is taking... It might be... It's one of those games that has no single-player component at all. I don't know how well Titanfall is or isn't doing.
I don't either.
That game not being my cup of tea. You have the online gaming community that play MOBAs, which are, by their definition, multiplayer. And even MMOs, like RPGs. Yes, you might be connected online to the network, but you're still playing, by yourself. You don't necessarily have to be involved in some manner of group play.
With MMOs specifically, there usually is a component of in-game content requiring a party of some kind. I'm trying to think of an MMO that came out recently that has a single that could do you do most of your in-game content as a single player, and most of it you can't. Final Fantasy XIV is the only exception, and that's because they designed the game, the reboot, I should say, when they did the release for Realm Reborn. Level 1 through 50 you can get to by yourself, and they have an actual storyline for it too. And that's the only one I can think of that would have it. But even once you hit 50, once you hit 50, you complete that story. The only thing you can do is going to party with people that you know, or finding a party and doing the endgame dungeons.
Okay, so you started to say something.
I just said Destiny, how there are certain parts of that game that you can do by yourself, but then there's most of it that you need a party of some sort, and in some cases it even requires a party of some sort to be able to do certain things.
I know Destiny has an endgame like rating system or something like that, where you play with 8 people or 12 people or some size number to fight a lot of like really strong things that you just couldn't kill by yourself, more so from the fact that it's a giant bullet sponge more than anything else.
And I know that there are some games in which you need to, I mean, yes, the emphasis is on single player, but in order to basically get everything and complete a game 100%, you need to play multiplayer to unlock some of those things, like Mass Effect 3, for example, does this. Where you can get a lot of the stuff, you can unlock a lot of the stuff in the single player, but to really get complete the game 100%, you must
complete the game 100% with the secret ending. You have to play online.
Right. It's not a requirement, but I mean, I do know plenty of gamers that are completionists. And it's to them I say, I wish I had your free time. I wish I had your free time. I'm usually content to complete the game, complete the story, and just be like, okay, move on. But for some, that isn't enough. They must extract every single element, extruding from every pore.
That's me.
And again, I wish I had your free time. And then you have games in which you have a single-player experience, but at the same time you are connected to the network at large. I think of Demon's Souls and Dark Souls, where you are playing as your character, but at the same time, a bunch of people are on, and you see them as little apparitions, and they leave little notes for whoever happens to stumble across them, and it's up to you to decide whether to listen or ignore whatever they have to say. I actually think that's an interesting evolution of the single-player experience. Also, I mean, if you've ever played Dark Souls or Demon's Souls, those games, you must be a glutton for punishment in order to play those, so...
I know, and some of the more single-player games, like single-player-only games that stand out to me that came out recently, Bastion and Transistor, like, those games are almost fully single-player. I don't think there's any sort of multiplayer aspect to them.
Nope, they're not, and, that's, where we have indie games trying to pick up the slack. And it always goes back to indie games, I find, that they're trying to do a lot of the things that the AAA studios are not. I mean, yes, indie games, indie studios, developers are not so emphasized on the bottom line as much as it is making great quality games. You have like indie RPGs or retro-style platformers. I mean, there's been some excellent indie games that I've played on Steam. Cthulhu Saves the World, and you've mentioned Bastion and Transistor, Giana Sisters Twisted Dreams. There are other games like Braid, Limbo, in which, the emphasis once again is on single player. But then again, I don't suspect a lot of indie developers, I should say, have the infrastructure in place like Sony or Microsoft to be able to create a immensely multiplayer experience, though. I could be wrong.
The only ones that I know of that have like a multiplayer aspect to them are Risk of Rain, and there's also an action RPG called Path of Exile, which is basically like a Diablo 2-esque sort of game, where you can play solo, but you can also play with friends that like you just invite them into your party, and you can go out and get loot drops and stuff like that.
But again, in indie titles, that's the exception rather than, you know, the overarching vast majority of
rule. Yeah.
With the AAA developers, not only are we seeing, you know, a more profound shift to multiplayer, but there are games in which, yes, they have a single player component, but it's kind of in there as an afterthought. Going back to the opinion article from VentureBeat, the writer mentions Battlefield, which has a very, very good and very strong multiplayer mode, but much of the complaints about the series is the single player mode, and the complaints are usually something along the line of it's too short, the characters aren't really that interesting, the plot sucks. Call of Duty has similar complaints, but then again, I don't know too many people who play Call of Duty for the single player.
Yeah, same here.
They spend 10 times more time in developing multiplayer for stuff that really doesn't even matter than the actual single player aspect, which is really where video games' roots have came from.
And so do you suspect that developers are shifting away from the single player experience in order to make a quicker buck, as Ron said earlier?
Well, personally, I do think so, but mainly I think it may also depend on the design of the game in question. Whether it sounds like it can support multiplayer or not, or if it would work well at all.
I think development time is also a factor. Like, most of these AAA games nowadays have 2, 3, 4 year development cycles, and if you're basing your gameplay almost solely on single player, you need to either have that single player be balls to the wall amazing and knock it out of the park, or you need to have a Skyrim, Fallout type thing where you have 200, 300 hours of single player available for people to play. To get them, for them to feel that they get the most out of the game, because of all these games costing $60 a pop now, or potentially $70 if the stuff from Canada goes through into the US.
Well, I mean, I don't think you need a single-player game of that length to make it worth your while. I mean, I mentioned BioShock. Those single-player experiences for those they don't last anywhere near as long, and I still felt I got an
yeah, they last like 12 to 20 hours, but again, like, for those games specifically, like, they knock it out of the park in terms of storytelling. Like, they combine storytelling with the single-player, and that, I think, gets most people's money out of it. But if you're just some Joe Schmo company trying to make a AAA game, sort of trying to make a name for yourself, if you don't do a BioShock quality in terms of storyline, or a Mass Effect in terms of story, I don't think your game's going to sell that well. Even if the game plays well and is like well balanced and well designed and everything.
I think Supergiant Games might have a word with you on that. Because Bastion and Transistor are between 6 to 8 hours. And they're both absolutely amazing.
Yeah, but those games are $10, $12, $20 for Transistor, I think, when it came out.
When it came out, yep.
Yeah, so, like, you pay $20 for a 6-hour experience. Like, that's basically, money value-wise, that's basically you going to the movie theater and seeing 2 or 3 movies, and you're saving money that way because you got a 6-hour experience. When if you went to the movie theater for 6 hours, you'd probably spend $40, $50.
But was the $40 or $50 worth it?
That's going to be up to the movie viewer to decide. Whereas with Transistor, from a pure value standpoint, I feel they would have gotten the value out of Transistor if they played it for the full 6 hours.
I mean, then again, yes, Transistor had, I think, a 2 or 3 year development time. So, I mean, yes, there might have been some complaints that for as long as it took Transistor to be made, $20 might have been a little steep.
But my counterpoint to that argument is then Supergiant Games is like a studio of 10 people, maybe.
It's a really small studio. Yeah,
it's a small studio, and these are like it's a 10 people, and that includes like the composer, the singer, the designers and the developers and the artists and things like that. Like that's a lot of work that they did to get that game that polished.
With a very limited staff, and yes, so yes, you can understand the lead time. Then you have a series like Assassin's Creed, where there are hundreds and hundreds of people working on it,
and they're pumping it out like every year.
Which then runs into the argument that you make all of these games and these sequels. You'd think wouldn't that get bored after a while? I'm personally sick of all of these sequels and sequels and sequels and sequels that AAA developers keep churning out.
Depends on how far they can take the story.
It also depends on and whether the new development cycle or new console cycle is out or not. Because remember, Assassin's Creed came out when the Xbox 360 came out, or shortly thereafter, and that was like a AAA studio doing an unproven AAA game. And generally speaking, I find design companies are more willing to do that at the beginning of a console cycle than they are anytime else, because the console's new, and even if the game sells well enough in the beginning of a console cycle, then you have a named product that you can just continue making sequels of for 2, 3, 4, or in Assassin's Creed case, they did for 10 years? Almost? Like 7 or 8 years of Assassin's Creed games? And only just now are we really getting sick and tired of Assassin's Creed, because that's more so from the fact that the fans want to see the assassins be in the 21st century and not in the 17th and 18th century.
Just to reference your statement, the first Assassin's Creed game came out 7 years ago.
Yeah, so that was again in the relatively early on in the Xbox 360's life cycle.
Yep, the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3. So, and then you have games like Call of Duty and Battlefield, which seemingly just have grown into this massive hydra and are still incredibly popular. They keep breaking sales records. But again, the draw, despite it all, the draw is still for them multiplayer. Our single-player games now are largely the more narrative-driven games, as opposed to, back in the 90s, of course, when you had Super Nintendo, Genesis, where, of course, every single game was a single-player, and the idea of multiplayer was bring a few friends over to your house and a couple of controllers and have fun.
Yeah. And that was just more so a case of, I think, limiting technology back in the 80s and 90s. Most of your multiplayer games had to be designed not only with there being another person there, but they had to be physically there with a controller. And then you need to deal with the whole programming aspect of having a second controllable character on the screen, or a third or fourth person. Mario Kart and most of your racing games sold relatively well because they're pretty much the only multiplayer games out of the time.
I actually kind of like the fact that Nintendo is still keeping that bit of nostalgia going. With, say, for example, yes, you can play online in games like Mario Kart and Super Smash Brothers, but you can also still, you can also still have a bunch of people come over your place and, have a bunch of controllers and play. I still like that bit of nostalgia.
It is nice.
There perhaps is no way to beat everyone's sitting in front of a TV on the same console playing a game.
Yeah, that way you could scream, yell, and punch them right there.
Fun.
Yes, instead of, being the only one in your living room with a headset on, yelling at your TV.
Or throwing your controller down in frustration.
Well, you don't need multiplayer for that.
Yeah, but
really
multiplayer seems to be the one that causes most of the rage and frustration and controller breaking.
But I think it's probably safe to say that the games that are largely now meant for, a true single-player experience are your RPGs or your very, very narrative-driven games. Like... Well, you could... The debate continues whether you consider Mass Effect an RPG, but... there's a game I'm playing now called Child of Light. That was made by Ubisoft, and that is entirely single-player. That's an RPG. We've mentioned Skyrim. That is... I have not met any one of my friends who have played Skyrim have actually finished it. Have completed everything in the game.
I haven't.
I finished the main campaign. That's the only claim to fame I have for Skyrim.
What'd you say, Kasey? You actually completed the game 100%?
No, I did not.
Oh, I was gonna say, because if you have, that I would A, not be surprised, and B, you'd be the first of my friends to actually have done that.
I actually prefer Oblivion over Skyrim.
Ah, okay.
So much.
And, we don't see a lot of platformers anymore. Except in the indie realm.
Or Nintendo.
Fair enough. Nintendo's still holding on.
They're holding on for dear life. Let the kidney on that branch. They're never letting go.
No, they're not. They're not letting go, but, I think they're doing just fine. I think that even the types of games now that developers are making, AAA developers I'm talking about, are less... They're less lending themselves to single-player experiences. Not to say that they've stopped altogether, but some of them may be thinking, what's the point? Like I said, I think Titanfall might be probably one of the very few games that I personally know of that actually has no sense of single player. There's probably definitely a few others out there. Titanfall is the only one that comes to my mind. You might have others.
Destiny, I think, is online only.
Is it multiplayer only, or...?
I think it's multiplayer only.
It's like
that was a weird noise.
It's like half and half. Like, you can do some of the stuff solo or by yourself, but I think almost everything has. I think it does require an internet connection at all times.
Well, the internet connection also might be for DRM issues, because...
Yeah, that's possible, but I'm not certain.
Because that's definitely the case in Mass Effect, where you have, if you're playing the single player in Mass Effect, you still need an internet connection so that it can dial home to EA. I will never forget the time I was playing Mass Effect 2, playing single player, and we had an internet outage. Time Warner was having issues, so my router was down, and I couldn't play it. Even though I was not playing the game, I was not playing multiplayer, I was not playing online at all. I was playing single player, but yet it said, nope, we can't connect to the EA servers, you can't play.
That's EA for you.
And yeah, so I don't know, does EA have their grubby little paw prints all over Destiny?
Probably.
Well, let's find out. Let us consult Lord Wikipedia. Obviously, Destiny's made by Bungie. But who is it published through?
I think also Bungie.
Activision.
Sure, I'm glad I said Activision instead of Bungie.
Yep, developed by Bungie and published by Activision. So, I do not know if the internet connection thing is a DRM, the DRM thing, but then again, EA is the devil to begin with, so.
Oh good, you heard me.
So, but yeah, RPGs, platformers aren't made anymore by AAA developers outside of Nintendo. The narrative-heavy games seem to be the ones really still holding on to that sort of single-player experience. Obviously, even fighting games aren't not made all that much anymore. And I used to spend countless hours just playing games like Mortal Kombat and Soul Calibur by myself, having just as much fun playing single player as I did playing online. And for my own personal aesthetic, I don't particularly like playing online with other people because not everything has to be a competition. They did this, which was it, Dead Space 3, in which you have the option to have a second player join your single player campaign.
Yeah.
It was 3.
I never did, and I'd never played the co-op, but just playing the single player was fun. You could have somebody online join your single player game, or have somebody with a second controller play along with you, which kind of reminded me of the glory days of the Sega Genesis, when you get to play Sonic the Hedgehog, with you playing Sonic and somebody else playing as Tails, and always would leave Tails in the dust. But I still think that just abandoning single player altogether a lot of developers would lose a lot of money, I feel. Yes, there might be, as you said, Ron, a lot more money to be made in multiplayer, but I think that I don't think that AAA developers, by and large, are willing to assume the risk of cutting off that potential revenue stream.
I think I'm inclined to agree with you. I think the reason why people are more hesitant to do it now than they were before is because of how Titanfall did. I know it sold decently well, but I've heard almost nothing about it since it came out, and that came out, 6-8 months ago?
Yeah, I think it was last spring, but let me get you an actual date on that.
I think it was June. I'm probably way off, though.
March 11th of this year.
Way off.
Yeah, so earlier this year, you had Titanfall come out, and for the first 2, maybe 3 weeks, I heard people talking about it and playing it. And since basically mid-April, I've heard nothing about it since. Did they just abandon it, or did they... Or what? I have no clue what's going on with the game. I don't know how well this will either.
Well, it reviewed very well. But it's a Xbox and PC exclusive. But some of the negative reviews for that game were, some of them were basically boiling it down to, just Call of Duty with mechs.
That's exactly how I describe it.
I've never seen the game being played, but I saw some online footage, some trailers and stuff, and again, I saw it, I'm like, I think I'm gonna pass. I also don't own an Xbox One. I have a 360, but still, I was just kind of about it. And despite the hype that the game got. You are right, Ron. I've heard nothing almost pretty much since it was released. And for a game that entirely built itself on multiplayer, you'd think that you'd hear more about it, at least in the gaming community.
Because people just love their multiplayer games.
Says he, slightly cynical. That's alright, I don't blame you. But, I mean, one of the reasons that I feel I get turned off by multiplayer, I mean, I don't really like competing against faceless people. Because I've given my limited experience playing online multiplayer for games, I came to the conclusion very quickly that there are people out there who have no lives.
You're just not realizing this?
Well, I've known it before, but you really see it in an online multiplayer game, especially, I mean, if you are just getting into multiplayer on a game that, say, has been out for not even a long time, maybe even a few months at that, you know, you're going to get your ass handed to because you have just like the beginning, starting, you know, stuff, equipment, stats, or whatever, and then you just get overrun by all of these people who have, you know, the latest and greatest and best because they've been playing the game 24 hours straight every day. And for me, that's a major turnoff. It's like, okay, well,
it's like if you don't buy it on launch date and you don't play it 24 hours a day like they do, you're just gonna get, you know, destroyed. And then it kind of takes all the fun out of it.
That's how I largely feel about multiplayer. And again, I feel much more comfortable, and I get a lot more fun out of actually having, you know, friends over playing a game. You know, we're all on, you know, the same. Maybe we're not all on the same skill level, but at the same time, you can punch that person.
And that's what makes it fun.
And that's what makes it fun, because violence is wonderful. Sometimes.
Well, mostly all the time.
That depends on who you ask. That depends on who you ask. What, do you go around blowing up government buildings for fun?
Yes.
Okay. And even, so we were just talking about Titanfall, and even Destiny, I have not heard too much about since its release. And that's another one that got incredible hype because it was made by Bungie, you know, the same people who brought you Halo. And again, that game got released, and I've heard nary a peep since.
I still see commercials for it. Taco Bell, from what I can tell, is still running some contests or something for it.
Okay. Then again, I'm, you know, with school in session, I am not, you know, up to date as I should be on most of the video game world. But
and with stress getting the better of you sometimes.
Yeah, well, that'll happen. But Destiny was also one of those games that Destiny actually reviewed probably a little bit worse than Titanfall. You have, you know, it was basically a sort of 8 out of 10, 7 out of 10. Even some people went so far as to give it like a 6 out of 10. Even though it sold very, very well, it shipped. Let's see, what is this little factoid here? On September 10th, 2014, Activision claimed that Destiny was the most successful new gaming franchise launch of all time, as the game shipped more than $500 million to retail stores and first-party stores worldwide, having sold over 91,000 physical copies on PS4, almost 50,000 copies on PS and PS3 within the first week of release in Japan. Obviously, it's sold much better here. And keeping along with Destiny, I don't know. Do you guys watch Yahtzee on Zero Punctuation?
Yeah, no, I don't.
Yeah. I watch it a bit.
Oh, Yahtzee's hilarious. In his review of Destiny, he described the game as aggressively boring.
I think one of the reasons why Destiny has been rated so badly is because it attracted a lot of Call of Duty players, and when they played it and they saw, that it has RPG elements, but more than that they couldn't win as easily as they do on Call of Duty, they kind of didn't like it. So that's why they gave the bad ratings.
There's a thought. There were some complaints that the plot for Destiny was a bit similar to Halo.
There's a plot for Destiny?
Apparently. Allegedly.
My brother's nodding his head.
In theory, I don't know. I mean, I played Halo 1 and I was like, why did this game get so much hype and success that it did? But then again, I played Halo 1 10 years after it came out. So I'm willing to admit the fact that I missed the train on that.
I kind of liked it. It was fun. Just the first one, though.
Just as an aside, the Halo kept my interest until the second half of the game, when basically your strategy was just run.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when you got to the Flood, and the entire strategy for the second half of the game was just run away. I'm like, oh. So now I get to this point, and now I have to basically just run all the way back to the beginning of the game? That's kind of boring.
It's like a one big long race.
Essentially. So. But, I mean, those are just a couple of examples of games that may or may not do multiplayer as well. I heard some great things about Mass Effect's multiplayer. And again, never having played it, all I have to go on are, people's opinions and reviews. But I think that the game that really started the multiplayer craze, and this is just my own personal opinion, we have to go back to GoldenEye. We have to go back to GoldenEye for the N64. I don't know if you've played that, Ron.
I have, and I own it, and I would probably agree with you, actually, on that, just because of, whenever I had friends come over, and we would play games, I should rephrase. I had friends come over, and we were just sitting down playing games, and then they saw that I had the N64. And then they asked, well, did you have GoldenEye? And I said, yes. And then they said, well, do you have 4 controllers? And I said, well, I've only got 2. Almost immediately, we started doing a rotation of loser passing controllers to the next person. And then whenever they came over from there on out, they brought on their own controllers. We spent almost the entirety of the time we were hanging out playing GoldenEye. Because some of the dumb stuff you could do in that game was really fun and enjoyable, and it made a lot of the more humorous moments. It meant sort of just the fact that you're sitting down and playing with friends, just having general dumb fun, was definitely something that not many people had done before previously, I feel.
So, and I think it is on that wonderful note that we're going to close the first half. On our second half, we're going to continue this discussion and also talk about some more games that do have great single-player experiences. and we will continue with that. But in the meantime, you will have some music, as is our usual custom. I haven't a clue. I'll just pull something at random from my iTunes and say, here, have fun, you listen to that. So, you're listening to Downloadable Content. We'll be back. Welcome back to this second half of Downloadable Content, talking about the single-player experience, or the death of, whatever your position falls. Somewhere along the way during the intermission, we lost a Kasey. Family obligations came up, so he had to, unfortunately, bugger off, so you won't have him for the rest of the episode. However, we bring on two people to replace him. We bring in Mike. Welcome back.
Hey.
And we bring on Reid. Welcome back to you, sir.
Thank you. It's been a while.
Yes, it has, and Ron is still here. He's always here.
I'm still floating here somewhere.
He's omnipresent. He knows everything. So, in our first half, we spoke largely about how some developers, some critics, what have you, are decrying the fact that more and more games are focusing entirely on multiplayer, or putting at least more emphasis on it, and basically giving players a shitty single-player experience. You know, I made the point that there are still a lot of players who do not want to go out onto the wide world of the internet and play with or against other players. So, you know, by focusing more and more on online multiplayer, I think that that would do more harm than good. I think, you know, by cutting off single player, you're removing a big chunk of the audience.
Gotta agree with you there. The internet's a scary place.
It's scary too, and I think a great example of the removal of single player features too is the new what is it, Elder Scrolls Online. It's not new anymore at this point, but still, I mean, Elder Scrolls has always been just a single player game, and the idea that the most recent one is exclusively an MMO is boggling to me. Nobody wants to multiplayer Elder Scrolls.
I actually, you know, that does feel kind of weird. I mean, I know that the only Elder Scrolls game I've played to this point is Skyrim, but that's one of the things that I've loved about Skyrim is the fact that it's you and your avatar and this huge, expansive, open world.
Yeah.
You're not sharing it with anybody else.
The tagline to the Elder Scrolls series has always been "Live another life in another world," you know, before that became hackneyed. And the idea that now it's not your world anymore, I mean, that's a drastic shift.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for, like, especially a game like Elder Scrolls, where it's a sandbox for the most part. You know, there's the story, but there's all these things to go out and explore, take a look at, and you feel like a pioneer. You know, you're going out in this untouched realm. You've just this thing in this cave and stuff like that, and to share that online, it kind of gets watered down when you have people posting like, "Hey, check out this uber secret cave here. Here's how you can get all of the hidden things in this location." You know, it's like the walkthroughs or guides are forced upon you just from other players talking in the environment.
Well, it's not even just that, like, that the single player campaign is dying, really. It's also too that any kind of like couch co-op too is dying. Like my wife and I, Maggie, we always used to buy Call of Duty. I didn't like Call of Duty that much, but it always had the split screen fun. And like now that's just totally being removed. It's just you got to get another system, another subscription to the online service, and another copy of the game. And it honestly feels like they're removing a core element of games, which is odd because with like the PlayStation 4, I don't know how many controllers you can have hooked up to it, like 18. I don't know. And it just seems like no one's taking advantage of this. We actually have friends who want to get together and play a game.
I think the only real major company who still has a significant emphasis on sort of like the multiplayer, like the couch piling multiplayer, is Nintendo.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
I mean, take a look at, Super Smash Brothers just came out on the Wii U. You can play up 8-player versus on that thing. I can't imagine, 8 people wouldn't even fit on my couch currently, but 8 players on the same screen, it's
insane when you think of like it's all the like elbow competition, you could call it, where instead of just having somebody that you don't know, you've never seen, it's somebody right next to you that could be like, I'm totally going to whoop you with Jigglypuff. Jigglypuff is a great all hail Jigglypuff. Which you kind of lose out when you have only, like, if I want to play something, I want to play Destiny with my brother or my friend. It's like, okay, you go to your house, you play it on your system, you go play on my system. We'll exchange names, we'll group up that way. It takes something away from the good old-fashioned split-screen multiplayer.
I mean, some of my greatest multiplayer, memories are, just sitting in front of on the couch with a group of friends, playing Mario Kart or Mario Party, all the games that would really cause you to lose friends.
Mario Party, ends friendships.
Mario Party just totally ends friendships. I remember clearly Super Mario Brothers Wii. I was playing multiplayer with Reid and a couple of others, and Reid was that asshole who just existed to kill everybody. You know, it's a shared pool of lies, but Reid's like, you know what? Fuck you all.
I want all the gold coins for myself. You're gonna go into a bubble to not die. Well, I'm gonna drop you into a hole while you're in that bubble and you're gonna die anyway. Deal with it.
No, I think I was more pick everybody up and throw them down the pit when I thought I was helping. But quote unquote helping.
Yeah, but I mean we're talking about Nintendo, but even those games with, you know, great multiplayer still have a pretty sizable single player.
Yeah.
I mean, you know,
oh, for sure.
Honestly, one of the areas that I feel where this single player multiplayer split is done well is like in PC games, like in Saints Row. I mean, the multiplayer aspect is really drop in, drop out, like old school, and you can play the game with a friend or you can play the game on your own, and really nothing's taken away from the single player experience.
I think Dead Space 3 is like that as well.
I never
Yeah.
played.
Dead Space 3 has drop in, drop out multiplayer, and
So that's great.
It's co-op only. It's not up to 4 people. It's only you. It's only you being the main character. I'm forgetting his name at the moment, and then some other guy that shows up in 3. It's like an ex-military person.
Oh, that's a similar setup to the multiplayer aspect in Watch Dogs. You either can go in looking for multiplayer action, where you're looking for like a player versus player experience, you versus one other guy in either a hide and go seek or a follow the leader-ish kind of mode, or you have like online racing, Gran Turismo against I think 4 other people, or while you're playing the single player, you're just out about in the world. Other players can pop into your game in the hide and seek aspect. You know, one other player at a time, basically trying to hack your character. You have to find them before they hack and all that. But it's that whole kind of drop in, drop out system as well. And I think that actually works really well.
I think that like a great example of what people don't want is Grand Theft Auto Online. Grand Theft Auto 5 and it's Grand Theft Auto Online. That seems to me to be like, because it's not fun to do by yourself. You need somebody else. But at the same time, it's like it doesn't have the immersion that the single-player campaign has. It just kind of feels like this endless grind with no reward. Like, oh boy, my guy leveled up, but that's all I got going for me.
Go ahead, Reid.
All right, go ahead. No, you first.
I think there are some games that certainly lend itself to, you know, a good, decent multiplayer, and there are some games that really do not. I mean, we've already mentioned Elder Scrolls. Also, you know, I don't think games like Resident Evil lend itself well to multiplayer. Capcom, you know, if we remember this gross suppository called Resident Evil Outbreak for the PS2, and that was Capcom's very first attempt at online multiplayer with Resident Evil. That was on the PS2. Capcom put all of its eggs in one basket with this game, that the single-player mode, while it was, you know, you played on the same levels as the multiplayer, it was your character, but you also had an AI partner, and the AI partner was so bad.
Like in Payday. You can play it single player, but the AI partners, it's like a handicap.
Basically, I was thinking Resident Evil 0 bad, but
I'm not going to play Payday 2 or Payday, but the single player campaign is not even worth playing.
And, you know, there are definitely some games that lend itself very well to multiplayer. You know, certain types of RPGs, I think, work very well. Some shooters, I think, work very well.
Surprisingly, the multiplayer aspect for Mass Effect 3 worked very well. I mean, that was almost it, you know, at first people were kind of hee-hawing over it when they announced it, but when it came out, it doesn't do anything in regards to the main story, really, aside from...
Well, it does with the... it does with
the reinforcements, like
It does a bit, but I mean, like, it doesn't affect the actual, like, in the now. I'm not, with the controller in my hand, if I'm playing the first player game, I'm the single player game, the storyline, I'm not going to be having a ton on back of my mind of the multiplayer necessarily, or worried about some multiplayer popping in and taking me out with a headshot or something like that. It's, there is that definite, here's the single player, here's the story mode, and here's the go have fun with your friends, multiple people online mode. And as you guys were starting to mention, like how it affects with reinforcements, which affects the story ending and such, is an interesting way to bind them together. But really, at the heart of it, it's two almost separate games, really.
Well, I think the thing with the Mass Effect is that the multiplayer component does help with your reinforcements, but you don't need to do it. Like, you can still get the ending you want. It's totally single player.
That's very true. My only gripe about that is the fact that if you're going to make multiplayer, if you are forced to play multiplayer, completionists probably hated that.
But the idea, so the problem too is that, like, in 10 years, no one's going to be. I don't even know if people are playing the Mass Effect multiplayer now. I mean, it could be dead. And so, what if I get into Mass Effect and I pick up the game and no one plays multiplayer anymore? So right off the bat, I can't get those achievements. I can't get those reinforcements. Like, that's it's a time-sensitive thing, whereas the single-player campaign is supposed to be able to be picked up by anybody at any time.
Provided you have an internet connection. Thank you, EA. That's a whole nother episode of EA's use of internet connection required to play single player. That's a whole different 2-hour-long rant.
Yeah, it works, because the last time I went on the Pirate Bay, I mean, you can't get the Sims or anything like that. They're not on there at all.
Oh, no, not at all.
Not at all.
Disclaimer, we don't condone illegal bullshit.
Bad.
It's bad for you. You'll get cancer. Anyway. But there are certain games in which the single-player experience is sort of evolving, quote-unquote, as it were. Just before we got started with the second half, I mentioned Dark Souls. And yes, I know, Mike, people brag about playing Dark Souls, but, I mean, I haven't finished it because, sometimes I am not a glutton for punishment. But, Dark Souls, Demon Souls has an interesting thing of you are playing single player, but at the same time you are connected to the PlayStation Network or Xbox Live or what have you, and you can see, little wisps, little, ghost-like things, in and out of your game, and you're connected to the network, so they leave messages for you, sometimes helpful, sometimes to troll you.
Nothing bad ahead.
No, oh yeah, I learned very early on to trust nothing. I will see a note, and if it says, like, beware trap ahead, I'll be like, yeah, right. And then suddenly my head gets lobbed off. I'm like, oh, you're right after all. But I think that's an interesting evolution of single player where you're not actually playing multiplayer, but you're still connected to the network at large.
But at the same time, someone can drop in at any moment and cut your head off.
Ron, have you finished any of the Dark Souls games?
I've played and beaten both of them.
Okay, so there you go, Mike. There's one.
Wow, I gotta admit, I'm impressed.
I mean, I haven't done the downloadable content for 2. That's just more so because of, like, cost permutations and anything else. But I've beaten the main, like, story in both of them. And honestly, I find 2 to be a little bit easier than 1. So.
Oh, but what did you think of how the mechanic worked?
I will admit, having it be that if you stay connected constantly, having someone come in and wreck your shit can be relatively annoying, especially when you're trying to go through your own leisurely pace, and someone who is clearly higher level and have better gear than you comes in and does that. Now, to try to stop that from happening by introducing soul memory, which is another can of worms entirely, because it ended up being that you couldn't play with your friends more so than stopping people from coming in and kicking your shit. I think I like the idea of it overall, like the whole like leaving notes behind, or like seeing their ghosts walk around as you do your own thing, because it kind of like says, hey, you're not the only one playing this game right now. There's other people in your area, and I do mean area because they have the location system based upon it's like on average like a 1 or 2 hour drive distance of people around you. So like if you're playing at like 3 a.m. for some reason and you see 3 or 4 people ghosting around you, well, that means there's another 2 or 3 more people that are up at 3 or 4 a.m. with you to indulge in this masochism.
You speak from personal experience then. You've been up at, 3 a.m.
I've been up at 3 or 4 a.m. to keep myself awake before the Korean League of Legends comes on. Because you know how time zones work and things like that. Where it's 7 p.m. in Korea, but it's 5 a.m. in Chicago. You gotta sometimes stay up for that shit.
Stop me if I'm wrong. But I think one of the things you're saying that you really like about it is that it's optional.
Yeah, I mean, it is optional. You can choose to say, no, I'm going to go offline now. Yeah. Fuck all y'all. You're not coming in and killing me, and I'm going to progress through this on my own. And now, in 2, it's hard. It's harder to do that because they do sort of require a constant internet connection, mainly because they do backup saves for your files. Like you can still save it locally, but they do backup saves on their servers as well.
Well, one of the things that I like that. I mean, I like that, but I don't know if anybody else on here does. But I play a lot of games by Paradox Interactive. And they make, like, Europa Universalis and Hearts of Iron and Crusader Kings. They're basically games where you stare at maps. And, grand strategy, armchair general games. But even in this realm, we see a stripping down of single-player features and more of a move towards almost forced multiplayer. I mean, we got Hearts of Iron 4 coming out soon, and I still know people, and I'm one of them who still plays Hearts of Iron 2, because it has more of a fleshed-out single-player experience. And I think these people get their cues from games like Battlefield, which, only have like a token single-player experience. It's not even really worth playing. And I hate to see, Dark Souls does it right in that you can add features in by playing it multiplayer, but I see a lot more of this stripping away in other games, where single-player becomes more of a thing that is there just because it should. Like the credits.
So you're saying that you feel... I'm sorry, I kind of got lost a little bit there, but are you saying that you feel that more people are feeling that they need to have multiplayer in with the game? So
game developers are definitely just leaning harder on multiplayer, and they almost include the single-player experience as an afterthought.
I think I'd have to agree with that. There seems to be a lot more games lately that, right out of the box. And actually, I say lately, but really, there's been games since, I'd argue to say, the first Call of Duty, Modern Warfare. I mean, sure, it had a single storyline game that you could play through, but the story was kind of crap.
And you beat it in
You didn't play it for the story. You played it for the multiplayer aspect.
Right.
Now we've seen that with Titanfall. Same thing with Titanfall. You can play a story, but even the story is multiplayer.
The story requires multiplayer. You cannot experience any single player aspect because there is no single player in Titanfall.
Exactly.
And
there's supposed to be a story, but it's kind of a multiplayer shoot everybody head action.
Yeah.
And I think that's a huge problem. I mean, I know many, just in my own personal circle of friends, a lot of people don't want to go online for one reason or another. Usually because, as soon as if you're like this newbie jumping onto an online multiplayer for the first time, and you're playing with all these higher level, you get your ass handed to in 30 seconds or less.
I think that experience that you just described is best represented in recent memory by Max Payne 3. Max Payne 3's multiplayer was just terribly broken from the beginning, and they never fixed it. It was one of those instances where, if you had the game earlier, you were just insanely better. How am I going to go up against this guy? His primary weapon is a grenade launcher, and I have a 9mm pistol and no body armor. How am I going to stand a chance? It was one of those things where the gap was just immediately so huge that it removed any fun.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, and a lot of people also don't like, if games with like a speaking or a text function. Let's face it, you jump onto an online multiplayer. There's a lot of rotten players on there.
Oh god, yeah.
Apparently, my mom gets around.
A lot, apparently.
All over the country.
She must have a lot of freaking flyer miles.
And suddenly I just picture the image of Egon in my head. Your mother! Just... But I mean, the culture is toxic to a lot of people, and, I think that some of the AAA developers are aware of that. Some of them are trying to do things to alleviate that. But at the same time, you're cutting off...
Nintendo, where, you say to the other person, you cocksucker, that was an unfair move. But your me actually says, I had a lot of fun playing with you.
Yeah, your me says something like, son of a submariner or something. And, you spoony bard. And, meanwhile,
your mother's a nice lady.
Yeah, meanwhile, you're screaming into your headset, all of the dirty words on George Carlin's list, and, it's just, coming out like that. But, you're cutting... I think it's a bad idea for a lot of these AAA developers to have these big, huge multiplayer ideas. You're cutting off a huge chunk of your audience. I mean, some of my greatest video game memories are when just me and me alone just get totally immersed in a game. You don't have to worry about other players.
Right. You can do it at your own pace.
So I think, it's in this regard where I think indie developers are trying to pick up the slack.
Oh man, that is so true. Wow. Like the Banner Saga. I don't know if any of you guys have played that, but that's a great single-player experience game.
Some recent examples for me personally, Transistor. Mm-hmm. Bastion, the two games by Supergiant. Even the Behemoth, you have Castle Crashers, which I think is great both single-player and multiplayer.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
But the idea still with Castle Crashers is the same as with Dark Souls. It's that you can get the whole experience, but the multiplayer just adds in a little fun. They're not stripping things out of the single-player experience like you see in a lot of games now.
Right.
Well, it's kind of... Look at the Borderlands games, too. I mean, Borderlands games, it's you can either go up to your 4-party, play through the story, or you can do it single-player. And it really doesn't... It adds to it when you do it multiplayer. A few other people, there's a bit more enemies. You get some interesting interactions, but there's no, at least in most games I've played, there's nobody screaming at you afterwards that you're this profanity or that profanity and trying to teabag your corpse.
Come on, man. That's an integral part of online experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's just downright un-American.
Yeah. You don't like being teabagged? Come on.
Aww.
You guys forget I play EVE Online. I'm conjugating by people in my own guild, corp, whatever. So sometimes in English, sometimes in Russian, Ukrainian, Swedish, whatever.
See, you're learning something. You're becoming more of an internationalist.
Sure, we'll go with that.
Reid's gonna learn curses in about 25 languages by the time he's all done.
Yeah.
I've never played EVE. I don't want to go anywhere near it.
I don't have enough money.
I saw the articles that I think the most one that sticks out in my mind, somebody shelled out thousands and thousands of actual dollars for a ship, which then got destroyed in a minute.
Well, it's not that people shell out. It's there's an equivalent to the amount of time and effort that goes in to create some of the ships equates to like a real world currency for the values. So there's a great joy in us EVE players of going and just wrecking somebody's ship that is the equivalent to more than their house payment, probably.
That's nice. That's nice.
The space is filled with that. Space is filled with jerks. What can you say?
You enjoy this. That's like the fucking going back to like when you were a kid. And you're like, that's a nice Lego castle there. I'm gonna knock it over.
Exactly. But,
Reid has become his own Minecraft creeper.
Now suddenly you understand why I took the path I did with our multiplayer Mario session.
Yeah. Just Reid walks up behind you.
Get away from me, you creep.
What the fuck?
But I mean, since we're on the subject and we are talking about like the single player experience disappearing and everything, with just since we had mentioned it, with EVE being an example of a game where there is absolutely no single player experience. That is first and foremost designed to be an online, a multi-giant people game. If there was no other people, the game would be boring as hell. It really relies on all the other interactions of people. And I think that we may get to a point that, if we're not already starting to get there, where there's a lot of games that the developers are not necessarily starting to cut corners, but they're realizing that, hey, if we make it so that other players have to throw in on this, we don't have to really develop this super hard or super intelligent AI NPC. They'll just have some other player that's shooting at them, or
we have someone doing our job for us.
Exactly. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not undermining developers right now. Really, I think it's...
Yes, you are.
Okay, yes, I am. But I think there really does come to a cost point of it. As these companies were looking at the growth of MMOs on PCs, like EverQuest, WoW. I mean, looking at how popular WoW became, and they said, "Oh, these are popular, and they're causing people to play with a bunch of other people. People must like to play with other people. Hey, we can decrease a bit of the content that we focus on adding more buckets and things in the sandbox, basically."
Yeah, I mean, that worked so well for Capcom. Capcom saw games like Call of Duty and went, let's make Resident Evil 6 exactly like Call of Duty.
Oh my god.
And the Resident Evil fan base rose up and slayed, or slew, whatever the word, Capcom. Like, what the fuck did you do to our series?
Flashbacks. This game is terrible.
The problem is just that there wasn't enough boulder punching.
That is by far my greatest achievement in history. How'd you kill Wesker? Oh, well, I punched the shit out of this boulder.
And then I fired an RPG at him, while he became a meat tornado.
I'm an angry man!
Best game ever. Punch boulders, meet tornadoes, and fight what looks like...
It's the final boss.
Way too much... Well, a lot of the bosses in that just look like the results of way too much Taco Bell, so...
So, Resident Evil 6, Capcom went, Call of Duty made $1 billion in a day. Let's make Resident Evil 6, entirely a shoot-'em-up.
You see, but they invested a lot of time and effort into Resident Evil 6, into the cutscenes, which is bizarre.
Oh, yes.
That's something that's exclusively single player, and I don't know about you guys, but instead of watching Chris wipe out a room full of guys, I would rather do that. That's like I should do it.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, knock yourself out. So, Capcom. I read a recent Game Informer article, talking to somebody working in Capcom and Resident Evil. I forget the name, some long Japanese name, and what do you have? What are you planning for Resident Evil 7? And my first thought was, oh God, no! Please do not do to Resident Evil what Sega has done to Sonic. Just stop. Just stop. Just stop. Like, well, our fans let us know, that they didn't really like Resident. Of course they didn't like Resident Evil 6. You made it Call of Duty.
I mean, I haven't played the new Dragon Age game though, but I feel like they got the message. Fans really hated Dragon Age 2, and from what I've read, the new Dragon Age is very good, and it's almost exclusively a single-player experience, if not entirely.
Just as a brief aside, the title of the Dragon Age game is called Inquisition, and I cannot see that without immediately thinking of Mel Brooks' History of the World.
Well, it's supposed to be.
Inquisition. Here we go, the Inquisition. What a show! We hope wishing that we'll go away.
It's supposed to be. They're killing all the mages. That's the thing. Not from what I've seen about it.
Yeah. My understanding is the reason why they're killing they're not killing all the mages. They're trying to stop all the mages from casting some dumb spell because, hello, giant fucking space rift in the sky that's caused by magic. Maybe if you stop doing magic, it'll go away.
Yeah, it works in the Dragon Age universe, but we can't get gun control in the real. Oh, I'm sorry, Tom.
So Dragon Age Inquisition is basically you're trying to stop the cult of Gozer from bringing about the end of the world.
Yes. The only problem is the cult of Gozer has already succeeded in opening the portal. You're trying to stop Gozer itself from coming in and wrecking your shit.
That sounds about right.
Okay. There you go. We've thrown Ghostbusters references around, steering the conversation back a few quantum leaps. Just the kind of sophisticated dialogue you'll only get here on downloadable content, ladies and gentlemen. Steering it back, I was starting to go in the direction of indie games because I feel that indie games. You mentioned it earlier, Reid, that the AAA developers are, they see what's going on in terms of what gamers are buying, and so they think that they can get away with less. Spending less to develop a game. I mean, that's one of the things that I love about indie games is that because they're such small studios, they don't have to necessarily worry about money. Money is not the be-all and end-all. Therefore, they can take a lot of risk.
True.
And so we're seeing games that are solely single-player experiences. I mean, you see as much with a lot of the retro games. We've got a game coming up next year, which I always call not Mega Man.
The Mighty Number 9.
Yes, Mighty Number 9. That's still an amazing story. That's just a big fuck you to Capcom. But anyway.
Mega Man 2.0?
There have been some games that I've played on Steam that I really, really enjoy. Some RPGs like Cthulhu Saves the World.
Yes. Oh man, a throwback to the old SNES style of games.
Mm-hmm. I'm playing a platformer. It's not by an indie studio. It's by Ubisoft. Child of Light. I don't know if any of you guys have played it, but it was.
I know of it.
It was like a little side project that Ubisoft very quietly released at the same time they released Watch Dogs. Which is great. I'm playing a platformer called Dust: An Elysian Tale.
Oh yes, I'm playing that on Xbox as one of the free with gold games.
Oh, you have the cost money membership.
Yeah, because I have an Xbox, so I got the gold. Because if you don't get the gold, you don't get not just free games, but you don't get like some of the other games. The aspect, for like I'm trying to think of an example, and I'm completely just blanking on all of them. You can play most of it, but for like the depth of the multiplayer, you got to have the Xbox Gold membership as well.
You got to do that with PlayStation now too.
On PS4 only, though. That's a PS4 thing, which is another thing. On PS4, and Xbox One, you have games in which, in order to play, you have this game which may have a crappy single player mode, but in order to play on the multiplayer of this very expensive game you just bought, you need to shell out more money for a membership.
For $14.99 a month, you can join the Orcs of WoW and explore Azure. I mean, it's the same mentality. Again, going back to MMOs is kind of like the granddaddy of forcing online play and everything. You would pay like $40 to $50 for the MMO, for the actual CD, spend several hours downloading and installing the updates, and then you'd have a monthly charge of like $14-15 to play the game regularly.
And if you act now, an ice crusher.
This limited edition thing, man, you're gonna love it.
I mean, that's not to say that there are still, not every game is going the way of multiplayer. I mean, I'm going now somewhat recent, not incredibly recent. BioShock Infinite, which was an amazing single-player experience.
The new Goat Simulator is MMO only. I don't know if you know that. So.
Oh yeah. But it's not online. It's the new Goat Simulator is now an MMO simulator, completely offline, and you can play as microwave.
If we lose Goat Simulator, we lose everything.
You can be a microwave as a class. I mean, enough said, folks. Enough said.
There you go. Okay.
Go out and download that right away.
And so, I mean, they do exist, but I mean, I think they're starting to become, at least good single-player games, are becoming more, few and far between, at least in terms of the AAA, where AAA developers are concerned. So I don't know if necessarily if single-player is dying. I think we're going to get a cyclical sort of loop in which you're going to reach a point where gamers are going to be like, hey, where'd the single player go?
I'm kind of in the same boat with you. I think we're going to see more of the trend we've been seeing of like the big AAA companies and everything having, hey, blah blah blah, new game, Smurf Crossing 2.0 is coming out, greatest game ever, multiplayer, challenge your friends, single player side mode as DLC or some crap like that. And you'll see more of either the indie companies or the smaller developers that have been around for forever coming out with the more single-player aspect. But I think you're going to see more and more some multiplayer, some community connection aspect in the game itself, whether it's like Dark Souls or forced upon you all the time playing against other people like Titanfall and everything.
Although, admittedly, look how well, Titanfall and Destiny were kind of, when they came out, most reviewers were kind of like, eh?
True.
Yes, they're largely or entirely multiplayer, but they had tremendous amounts of hype, and then when they finally came out, it just was like, so the overall consensus was a resounding meh.
Oh, I know recently Bungie had a statement where they basically were saying that they don't believe that current review companies know how to review an MMO in regards to the reviews and scores for Destiny.
Well, whatever the case may be, I still think that I think what AAA developers are doing overall is that if they keep this mindset of getting rid of single player, it's eventually going to affect their bottom line. I mean, as I said before, that's a massive chunk of their audience that they're leaving behind.
True.
So, do we have any final thoughts to say on the matter before I put this episode to bed? I see. Excellent. All right. Excellent. And Ron's probably asleep by now.
No, I'm still here. I just haven't had much to contribute because all the points I wanted to make have already been said.
Oh, well.
I'm still holding my breath for Hello Kitty Adventure Island. Online
I'm
play.
waiting too, man. I'm waiting for that too. That's gonna be it.
The day I can dress up my kitty with other people from around the world, that'll be day of a happy Reid.
Although apparently there's a single player game out there that I think either just came out like in the last couple of weeks or came out in the last couple of months. I don't know. My time when I'm in school is just a completely nebulous thing. The Evil Within, which is a survival horror game I actually really want to get into.
I think that's on sale right now on Steam.
It's certainly on sale on Amazon for $20 as opposed to its usual $50.
It's 30 on Steam.
Yeah, the one problem with me having a birthday so close to Thanksgiving is the fact that I've basically been given a hard cutoff of when I can buy shit for myself. However, I did get a $50 GameStop gift card for my birthday, so any video games I do not get for Christmas, well, I'll just...
There you go.
There I go. So, if you have any comments, questions, things on this episode or any other episode of downloadable content, you can get in touch with us a variety of ways. Facebook.com/DLContent, on Twitter at DLContent, on Tumblr, DLCpodcast.tumblr.com. You can also email us, dlcontent1@gmail.com. And as always, all episodes can be found on iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher, so a bunch of ways to get downloadable content into your ears. Take that as you will. So,
I feel a little uncomfortable.
I need to take a shower, and I need an adult.
You feel uncomfortable. You weren't uncomfortable with Maggie in the sky in the Elder Scrolls episode.
You went a little off the rails there.
Yes. You feel uncomfortable. That's impressive.
There's not enough tits in Elder Scrolls.
And Ron is probably huddled in a corner, yearning for mommy. It's a.
Please make the mad pen go away. Please make the mad pen go away.
I do believe in spooks. I do believe in spooks. I do. All right, I'm Brian. It remains for me to thank Mike, Kasey, Ron, and Reid for being on this episode. So, thank you, gentlemen. Have a good one, everybody.